Hello, everyone. I'll be presenting on the Maison du Japon, or the Japan House in Cite Universitaire. My name's Jack, and to start off, I thought I would show some photos and some videos that I took while visiting the building, just to give you guys a quick idea of what it looks like and generally some of the architectural principles of it to start off. So here's a brief video. That's the small pond that's part of the garden in the front. And the garden actually wraps all the way around the building. And then, yeah, here on the left, we see the kind of a bottom up view of the porch in the front with its exposed kind of ribbing on the eaves of the porch, as well as this wooden kind of carving of the rising sun. And then this on the right, this small Japanese inspired Zen garden. There's a lot of like very traditional Japanese elements as a part of this building. So briefly on the history of this building, the idea for it was originally proposed by Paul Claudel, who was actually the French ambassador to Japan at the time. So he proposed this in 1921, but it was rejected. So he kind of just went along, um, and eventually he ran into this gentleman named Jiro Hachi Satsuma, who was very excited about this project or finishing it and like seeing it through. He's very young and he's the grandson of a very successful cotton trader in Japan. Um, and he was also kind of a socialite. He knew a lot of people in Paris around like the 1920s. So he was able to get a bunch of money together from his father and from himself and um, propose this idea to the president of Cite Universitaire, who Claudel put him in contact with and was able to get it approved. So he had an architect named Pierre Sardou design the building, and the building officially started in 1927 and finished in 1929. Um, a bit about Sardou. He is, at the time, he's the chief architect of historical monuments in Paris. And he went to the École des Beaux-Arts de Paris. So he had a good idea of kind of taking inspiration from classical forms, symmetry, the usage of like material like stone. Um, and yeah, he definitely used this in a bunch of his buildings. And he did this project kind of in the middle of his career. Um, I think this building, well, it was intended mainly to be kind of a symbol of relations between Japan and France, contributing to kind of just generally bringing people together, especially international students and researchers to France, but also to hold like cultural activities for people to come to and be exposed to. And there's also a political significance as well, I'd say, that um, just in general during this time is pretty tumultuous, is between world wars. There's definitely a lot of politicians, including like the Prime Minister of Japan, who were involved or consulted during the building of this, and especially with Japan's role in World War II, um, it definitely came to symbolize the enemy. Probably at certain times, it was even occupied by American staff during World War II, and no Japanese students were living there at the time until about like 10 years after the war ended. So it went through a lot of changes and a lot of different people living there, um, and very tough financial times as well. But it was helped out a lot by the Japanese government, who was very generous with providing funds. It was also renovated twice, just kind of repainted and restructured in 1979 and 1995. Now I'll go into the architecture. So one thing that to consider is one of the main issues or constraints that the Sardou faced when building this was just the general plot of land and how small it was, the land that was allocated to them. They did try to contest it, but they were pretty unsuccessful. So instead of just creating like a giant cube or a skyscraper, as many other architects might have done, um, Sardou he took a lot of inspiration from, uh, as you can see on the top right, these classical Japanese structures. This is a castle, and I don't think he had been to Japan at all. So a lot of this inspiration was coming from Japanese woodblock prints, like the ukiyo-e prints that he had seen, that had come to Paris. And so he implemented this in this building, creating this three pavilion structure, as you can see here, where each one is on a different floor. There's a on the third, the fourth, and the fifth floors, and it kind of creates this like harmony of just playing around with the different heights of each part of this building, which is very interesting. Um, he also some other Japanese characteristics he kind of tried to emulate were the roofs being like very slightly curved. In person, like even from the photo, I can barely tell if they're curved, but they are very slightly curved, which is inspired from Japan. Um, and also, as you can see on this bottom left photo, um, having like kind of the structure, the bones of the building on the eaves, as well as on the roofs being kind of exposed, which is very common in Japanese architecture as well. Continuing on, there's also here's some pictures of the rest of the garden that wraps around from the front to the back. Um, I think one of the most important parts of this building is that this is a French architect who is interpreting Japanese structures through the eyes of a Frenchman. And he was pretty open about saying that he didn't want this building to be something that just looked like it was like taken from Japan and just put in France. He wanted it to be its own fusion of the two. So one major way that he demonstrated this is by using mostly French materials to create a Japanese style. So some examples are the um, the use of reinforced concrete, almost the whole frame of the building, and the slabs you can see on the bottom left here, as well as the columns. A lot of it is all reinforced concrete, which is, as we've seen in class, which is very common at the time, especially in the Art Deco period. He also, on this top picture here, um, this stone is imported from a part of France called Isère, and used to create this using this technique called opus incertum, which is very kind of like based on irregular shapes and kind of this rustic um, design that was at the base of a lot of Japanese castles. So he used that technique as well. Um, yeah, going inside the building, um, two of like the main um, the main aspects of the architecture that this building really is proud of are these two large paintings by Tsuruharu Fujita, who is a very pretty well-known painter at the time, Franco-Japanese painter, who was contemporaries with like people like Picasso and Matisse. Um, but he was very important just because, especially for this building, he was known for combining Japanese and Western style art together to create his own unique paintings. So there's this one which just depicts a lot of horses and dogs to represent probably strength and vigor and youth. This is right in the entrance. And then in the main grand hall area, there's a larger triptych which features European settlers mingling with the Japanese, like the first contact, as well as a lot of other kind of more day-to-day figures. There's some nude women and construction workers. It's like very open to interpretation, which I think he intended to kind of show the universality of this space and how it's kind of meant to bring a lot of cultures together, or mainly France and Japan. But yeah, um, the rooms themselves are very, very simple. There's around 60 originally, but now around 70. There's a lot of gray, very like very stripped back furniture. There's a little quote from one of my sources that said they wanted to emulate harmonious simplicity even in luxury. So Satsuma just wanted to be um, just wanted a design that was just easy to live in. He had worked with this guy named Marcel Magne to design the furniture, and each room had its own bathroom, which was also a luxury at the time. Um, Finally, I wanted to talk a bit more about my final thoughts on the building. I think one important thing to touch on is, like I said earlier, the fact that this building is a Japanese style building done by a Frenchman. So there's definitely um, it's definitely interesting because I'd say this kind of comes at the tail end of the Japonism or Orientalism that we talked about earlier in class, with like that world as exhibition text, and how um, it's interesting to think about what might be lost, or even gained when portraying a style that someone isn't completely familiar with or that is foreign to them, and how it can be both inspiration but also verge on obsession or fetishization. There was a quote from one of my readings that said, "This building was both a voyage at sea and the existence on a land of the extreme Orient." So I think it's definitely kind of talking about how this building was both evoking the feeling of going to a foreign land, but also bringing the foreign land here. Um, and it's just a very Western take on a foreign style of architecture. But I'm glad that they acknowledge that it's not just an exact copy and more so an interpretation. Um, I also think it's very representative of this time in architecture in France that was kind of between Art Nouveau and Art Deco. So while while the architect, he wasn't very like obviously naturally inspired by Japan, since this was like his assignment to create a Japanese building. Um, since Art Nouveau was definitely more focused on Asian inspired, like curved forms and more exotic design. Um, I think this building is kind of right in the middle, where it's definitely showing all those things, but it's done in a more geometric kind of strict back form, that is very characteristic of people like Le Corbusier or like other Art Deco figures who use very harsh geometric shapes. So I like that it's kind of in between these two styles, and I definitely don't think it would have been the same, for better or for worse, if they had someone who was actually Japanese design the building. Um, but yeah, that is pretty much it. Thank you for listening, and here are my sources.